The morning air was so clear it seemed to ring. High above, the sky was a deep, unwavering blue, the kind that comes only after a night of hard frost. Sunlight poured over the mountain meadow, striking the snow until it glittered as if scattered with crushed glass. Each breath Eli took left a cloud that drifted and dissolved in the stillness. He was on his way down from a ridge hike, boots creaking in the cold, when the scene ahead made him stop mid-step. Just beyond the tree line, a dozen mule deer stood at the edge of a wide, white field. They weren't grazing. They weren't moving. They were waiting. The herd formed a loose arc, facing out toward the expanse of snow. The lead doe stood slightly ahead, her ears swiveling toward every faint sound, her breath a small plume in the crisp air. A young buck shifted his weight, stamping one forehoof lightly into the snow, then lifted his head to sniff the field before stepping back. Eli stayed still, half hidden among the pines, watching. Normally, deer crossed these meadows without hesitation, leaving neat trails of prints through the drifts. But here they were, silent, unmoving, every set of eyes fixed on the field ahead. There was no sign of a predator, no wind to carry a strange scent, only that unshakable stillness, as if the open ground itself had turned into something they didn't trust. Even from this distance, Eli could feel it, the weight of a decision being made, not in words, but in the subtle language of posture, ears, and breath. And for reasons he couldn't name, the sight sent a small, cold thread of unease curling down his spine. Eli stayed where he was, leaning lightly on his trekking poles, half expecting the lead doe to make the first move. But the minutes passed and nothing changed. The herd held its ground like a silent jury. The doe's muscles rippled once under her tawny winter coat, a subtle tremor that ran from shoulder to flank. Her ears stayed forward, locked on the white expanse ahead. A younger deer, maybe last year's fawn, took two tentative steps forward, the snow crunching softly under its hooves, and then stopped. It lowered its head, as if to test the ground, inhaling through wide nostrils. For a heartbeat, Eli thought the herd was about to move. Then the young one abruptly stepped backward, its tail flicking in a nervous burst. The rest shifted uneasily, hooves stamping in place, small clouds of breath puffing into the sunlight. But still, no one crossed. From where he stood, the meadow looked harmless, almost inviting in its smooth perfection. No holes, no obvious ice, no movement under the snow. Just an unbroken sheet of white stretching to the opposite slope. But the way the deer avoided it, the way their bodies leaned away from it, made it look different somehow. Eli took a step forward to get a better angle. The herd didn't bolt, but their eyes tracked him sharply. It felt less like he was intruding and more like they were waiting to see if he'd make the same mistake they were avoiding. The thought lodged in his mind like a burr. They know something I don't. Eli eased out from the tree line, the cold air sharpening against his cheeks. The snow was knee-deep here, but it was packed firm under his boots, each step landing with the solid whump he expected from frozen ground. He paralleled the herd's position, staying about 20 yards from the lead doe, and worked his way to a spot where the meadow opened wider. From here he could see the whole field, a smooth, uninterrupted sweep of white, framed by the dark rise of pines on the far slope. But the longer he looked, the more he noticed small irregularities. The snow near the center sagged slightly, forming the faintest depression, as if the ground had settled. It wasn't dramatic, just a soft, almost imperceptible curve, where the surface dipped inward. Eli's brow furrowed. He took another step forward, then reached out with his trekking pole and jabbed the snow ahead of him. The pole met resistance for a moment, then suddenly punched through with a sharp crack. A hollow sound echoed up through the hole, unlike the dull, solid thump of frozen earth. It was brittle, almost glassy, followed by a faint, breathless rush of air. Eli knelt, brushing away loose powder with his gloved hand. Beneath the snow, he saw a thin layer of ice, bluish and uneven, with delicate white fractures running across it like a spiderweb. His fingertips tingled with the cold, radiating up from it. A second jab with the pole widened the hole, and this time he caught the faintest glint of dark water moving far below. The field wasn't a field at all. It was a frozen shell. Eli shifted his weight back, careful not to put pressure on the fragile surface in front of him. He widened the hole with his glove, scooping away handfuls of snow until the thin ice beneath was fully exposed. It wasn't the opaque, milky ice of a solid pond freeze. This was translucent, brittle, a weak crust with uneven patches, some so thin he could see the shadow of running water below. Through the bluish glass, ribbons of current moved sluggishly, curling under the ice like restless smoke. He pushed his trekking pole deeper into the gap, and the tip broke through with almost no resistance. The sound was a sharp snap, followed by the muted rush of water echoing up from the darkness. A faint draft of icy air drifted through the break and brushed his face, carrying the metallic scent of meltwater. His eyes traced the surface outward. The field was, in fact, a frozen-over section of the mountain creek, swollen from recent snowmelt and then skimmed with ice during the last cold snap. The snow had fallen on top, disguising it completely, but the ice sheet itself was pocked with hairline fractures. In some places, the ice sagged, where water had thinned it from beneath. Eli imagined a deer stepping onto it, or a hiker, or a snowshoer, and the entire crust collapsing in an instant. The frigid water would drag them under, pulling them into a narrowing channel beneath the ice. In temperatures like this, even seconds could be fatal. He straightened slowly, eyes scanning the meadow with new understanding. From a distance, it looked harmless. Up close, it was a trap just waiting for weight to cross it. Behind him, the deer stood exactly where they had been, watching in absolute stillness, as if to say, "Now you see why we stopped." Eli stepped back from the edge of the ice, planting his boots firmly in the safety of the tree line. His breath came faster now, not from exertion but from the prickle of urgency crawling up his neck. That morning on the ridge, he'd passed a pair of snowshoers, heading down the trail toward this very meadow. If they kept the same pace, they could be here any minute, and nothing about the scene from a distance would warn them of the trap beneath the snow. He swung his pack around and pulled out a length of bright orange paracord, a habit he'd kept for marking safe routes in deep snow. Working quickly, he tied one end to a young aspen at the tree line, then stretched it across to another tree, creating a visible barrier parallel to the meadow's edge. Next, he stomped a wide X into the snow just beyond the cord. Deep, deliberate marks that would stand out even in the flat light. The sound of his boots compacting the snow was sharp in the quiet air, echoing faintly off the surrounding trees. When he was finished, he turned toward the herd. The deer hadn't moved, their ears still forward, watching. The lead doe's dark eyes seemed fixed on the paracord line as if assessing its purpose. Eli gave a half smile, nodding in their direction. "Thanks for the heads up," he said under his breath, his voice lost in the breeze. The air had shifted, a faint rustle through the branches, the kind of change that told him time was passing quickly. Somewhere below on the trail, he thought he heard voices carrying upward, muffled but approaching. He stepped back toward the line he'd strung, ready to intercept whoever came next. The deer had sounded their silent alarm. Now it was his turn to pass it on. It happened subtly, almost as if some unspoken agreement had been reached. The lead doe flicked her ears once, then turned away from the open white expanse. One by one, the other deer followed, hooves crunching softly as they moved along the tree line, heading upstream toward a safer crossing. Their breath lingered in pale plumes behind them, vanishing into the crisp air. Eli watched them weave between the pines until their tawny backs disappeared into the folds of the forest. The quiet they left behind was heavier, more aware. The meadow seemed even more deceptive now, just a sheet of white under a perfect sky, hiding its hollow heart. Then came the muffled sound he'd been listening for. Voices, laughter, the steady thump-thump of snowshoes on packed trail. Two figures emerged from the bend below, climbing toward the field. One wore a bright red jacket, the other a deep green, both with mirrored sunglasses catching the sun. They raised hands in greeting when they saw him. "Beautiful day," one called. "Yeah," Eli replied, gesturing them over to the tree line. "Stay on this side. The whole field is an ice sheet over the creek. It won't hold your weight." The two hikers slowed, glancing from him to the untouched snow. Seriously? Looks solid from here, the man in green said. Take a look, Eli said, leading them to the hole he'd opened earlier. The bluish ice and the faint glimmer of dark water below needed no extra explanation. Whoa, the woman in red murmured. We would have gone straight across. Exactly, Eli said. The deer knew better. They wouldn't touch it. That's what made me check. The man shook his head, letting out a low whistle. Guess they were smarter than us. Eli smiled faintly. Today? Definitely. By late afternoon, the meadow lay in shadow, the sun slipping behind the ridgeline and casting the snow in shades of deep blue. The hikers had gone on their way, keeping to the forested route Eli suggested, and the air had settled back into its still, crystalline quiet. From the far slope, Eli looked down at the field one last time. In the fading light, it was easy to imagine someone stepping onto it, drawn by its smooth surface, its promise of a shortcut, never realizing they were walking over a thin shell above a rushing creek. The image of the deer standing there that morning replayed in his mind. The lead doe frozen at the edge, the others shifting uneasily, but refusing to follow her forward. They hadn't needed to prod the snow or poke holes to know it wasn't safe. They'd read it in the way the ground sounded under their hooves, in the faint scent of water hidden below, in the subtle give of the snowpack. Instinct had told them to stop. Eli felt a quiet respect settle over him. He'd learned to read maps, weather, and trail signs, but the deer had read the land itself. And because he'd noticed their hesitation, he'd avoided a danger that might have swallowed him without warning. He turned away, the cold air brushing against his face, and followed the safer path down into the trees. Behind him, the field remained untouched, the snow unbroken, a trap waiting for the unwary, marked now by nothing more than a bright orange cord and the memory of a herd that had simply refused to cross. Sometimes, he thought, survival isn't about charging forward. Sometimes it's about knowing when to stop.